Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Brandon Turner, who is a personal finance coach and facilitator specializing in working with people in recovery. He's also the author of the book, Personal Finance and Addiction Recovery. Thanks for joining me today, Brandon.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, man, you've got a pretty incredible and honestly, it sounds like crazy story. I mean, you went from making $200,000 a year illegally. You got set up in like a deal gone wrong, basically. You went broke. You were facing drug trafficking and tax evasion charges. I'm assuming that your addiction played a role in all of this. So tell me a little bit about how all of this started.
Oh boy. Well, I had my head on pretty straight until college, and nobody really has a lot of money in college, and I had an addiction to fuel. So that's where I got my first taste of selling and using. So they kind of spiraled out of control together. Eventually, I had left school as a dropout about 3 years into it, and I had no purpose, no direction, no idea on what I wanted, and I knew how to make money. And so that just kind of spiraled out of control. I think it was only a matter of like 2 or 3 years. Now I had come from maybe selling an ounce of weed, and then all of a sudden it's like, serious weight. And I was up for days at a time, drinking, not responding to my family. And it was only a matter of time before I'd either end up dead or in jail. So just to kind of scoot along, I ended up getting set up. That was the first thing. That was the first wake up call. And I'm in and out of the courthouse for probably 9 or 10 months. And I'm failing drug tests, and they're threatening me with jail. And finally, it was like, okay, you have to make a choice where you're either going to sober up or you're just going to go to jail. Like, we're done with you. There are people knocking down the door to this program to get in here and straighten their lives out, and you're taking us for granted. So here's your ultimatum.
Okay.
Right around that time, from the setup to the point where I decided to get sober, I had probably tripled my income during that time. And I just had no ability to look at long-term consequences, and the addicted mind.
And so to be clear, when you say between this time of getting set up, is this still illegally?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I had no plans on stopping anything. And I feel like, at the end, it was very similar to that one last drink, one last time using. That was in the deal for me. All right, one more deal. So I feel like I would have done this until something like this happened.
Okay.
I was just that type of person to where it was going to have to be forced on me,
Yeah, I get that.
So, I got beat for, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars all at once, probably close to 70 grand in a week. And I had an outpatient program to pay for, a 6-month-old child at home, and I had no job. And they were saying, you need to complete this outpatient program that lasts 3 to 4 months. You have to do this to get cleared through the courts. Okay. I thought I could sober up.
Okay.
So they said, yeah, you got to do this. And I had maybe $10,000 left. And by the time I had gotten through that 3 to 4 months and gotten a job, I had about $200 in my pocket. I'm working for $13 an hour in a facility that I have no experience in. And I have $75,000 worth of unsecured debt in the IRS knocking at my door,
Wow.
threatening to lock me up for my negligence.
Well, let me ask you something because, man, actually, our stories are very similar. My using and selling drugs went hand in hand. And for
Yes,
me, it was like it started with weed, and then it was kind of like one of these deals in high school, like, well, I can just kind of figure out this way to like smoke for free. And then it was like I definitely got addicted to the fast money, the lifestyle, and it kept going, and I kept doing harder and harder drugs as I was selling harder and harder drugs. And I know that one of the things that happened to me is, I kept getting, like you're saying, one more time, right? Just like the one more drink or one more drug. It was one more deal. And that one more deal would always lead to me getting high again, even though it was one of those deals, like I'm sure you've heard similar sayings where people say, like, you can't you can't be clean living a dirty life. And
exactly.
and that was a thing that I was trapped in. So, as this was going on, I mean, were you experiencing that where you would go back to do another deal and you would keep getting high, or what was going on with that?
Absolutely. The root of it was definitely that I did not want to get sober.
Okay.
That was the root of it. And this was just kind of like a smoke screen to prevent me from looking at myself.
Okay.
If I had money coming in, I didn't have a problem. That was my mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and man, I think I definitely got trapped in that for the longest time. I thought even when I was trying to do things more legally, I thought like a bigger paycheck or just more money in the bank, I thought that was gonna fix the problem. And what I couldn't see is that if I couldn't get clean, and actually stay clean, it wasn't gonna matter. I wasn't gonna be able to I could have huge, huge checks hit in the bank account, and it wouldn't matter because I wouldn't be able to hold on to it, you know?
Exactly.
So, okay, so you're going through this outpatient program, you've got all this debt. Where do things start to turn around in terms of your recovery? Like, how does that take shape?
Again, I was in a position to where I had to start paying the IRS.
Okay.
I got my notice that said, "This is it." I was just kind of throwing them in the trash.
Sure.
That'll
Yeah.
make the problem go away, sort
Right.
of thing. And I remember seeing it. It was like open immediately, and just it had a real catchy headline. It's like, all right, I better check this one out.
Hmm.
So we're gonna take your vehicle. That was my only asset, and you're gonna get locked up if you don't comply.
Wow.
So when you were talking about trying to live a sober life and then living dirty, I considered that also dirty. I wasn't selling drugs or anything anymore, but I still had trouble with the law. And that's one of the first things I work on with people in recovery is anything that has to do with the law, just clean it up. Because that was a huge weight off my shoulders, huge. And when I actually just looked and like decided like I'm going to take care of this,
Yeah.
it wasn't that bad.
Hmm.
Like my mind made this huge gap between like here and there, like, oh my God, don't look. What if this, what if that? And like as soon as I called them and I was just honest, and I'm like, hey, this is where I'm at,
Yeah.
where I was, and this is what I'm trying to do. Are you willing to work with me? Absolutely. There was
Man.
no problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I had a lot of and I do want to ask you more about this, just people who are starting over. I definitely want to do a deep dive into that. But I know what you're saying. We like build these problems up into these huge things. Like I didn't have a valid driver's license, for instance. And
Mhm.
it was this whole thing, and man, I had gotten all these, like, tickets. I was having to pay all these, like, ongoing fines. It kept, because I would get pulled over for being an idiot, basically,
Mhm.
and I would have an expired license or an invalid license, and I would have to pay all these extra fines, and it was costing thousands and thousands of dollars, and I was just thinking I was never gonna get a license again, and my sponsor was like, "Man, well, why don't you just go up to the DMV and just see what they say?" And they had sent me a valid license, but it had gone to the wrong address, and literally all I had to do was pay $12 and I got a license right there.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you're saying. So now, how did you find, I know you were in this outpatient program. So did that introduce you to a 12-step program, or what happened there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
To me, that was like the equivalent of going to jail. Like I just looked like I felt like a victim. They're like, "Yeah, you got to go to 5 AA meetings a week."
Okay.
That was part of the requirement,
Yeah.
and I pissed and moaned the whole way.
Yeah.
You know, even though it was going to keep me out of jail and redirect my life, I was just not about it at all. But it was the best thing I've ever done, and getting set up was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty awesome. So I want to talk about your book here, man. I really want to make sure, and I'm going to be a little selfish for our listeners out there in the sober nation, because I want to get as much good information out of you as possible to really help them, because I'm sure that there are some people that are in different stages, right? Maybe they're completely starting over. Maybe they've been sober a little while and they're still kind of struggling financially. And let me ask you that first. Like, why do you think it is that so many people in recovery struggle financially? Even after maybe they've been sober for a while. Like, what do you see as the issue there? Because that's something, like, when I go to meetings and stuff, like, it does come up, and everyone, whether they're in recovery or not, they're going to have money issues, I think. But what is it about addicts and alcoholics that there's just this real issue with finances? What do you think that's all about?
That's a great question. Very, very broad, and there's a lot to unpack there.
Sure.
But if I were to keep it fairly simple, I would say that we just have an issue with looking at ourselves. And when you look at finances, and let's see how I can say this, it's going to mimic the way that you think and behave.
Mm,
The cash flow statement. So, like, I didn't want to be held responsible. I didn't want to look at the IRS. I had spending habits based on making $3,000 to $4,000 a week. Now I'm making, $500 a week, and I'm forced to change. And it's easier to just complain and act like a victim than it is to actually change. And it took a lot of introspection. And for me, it was a lot like looking in the mirror.
mm,
I owe this much on taxes. I owe this much on student loans on a degree that I didn't even use. It was
yeah.
an expensive party. I owe this much because I neglected to pay my hospital bills. And I feel like the root of that was this: I just didn't want to deal with it.
Mm,
I just ran from challenges and problems that I had created.
wow.
And I just didn't want to look.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and what I'm relating this to is you're describing that, and I think that's about right. I know that for me, and I think this is a challenge that a lot of people face when they come into recovery. It's like, man, we've done so much damage. And I
Mhm.
think that all of us, to some degree, feel like, I am just never going to get out from under this. So I'm just going to keep sweeping it under the rug, but the problem is that now, we don't have the drugs and alcohol to kind of mask all that. And so, but what I'm thinking about, it's almost like we have to do an inventory, like a fourth step on our finances, right? And that can suck.
It wasn't easy, man. And I encourage people to do that. There are some financial coaches that encourage to use cash instead of plastic.
Okay.
I encourage to use plastic because every transaction you make is going to be documented.
Hmm.
Your 4 steps are already written.
Yeah.
All you got to do is read it.
That's a good point. Yeah, actually, see, and I've thought about that a lot too. That's a good point. It can be easy to swipe that card quicker sometimes, right, than it can be to pull cash out, or maybe it seems like it's harder to pull the cash out, but I think it's actually easier to spend cash, and you're not tracking it. Like, who's going to sit there and really write down every single time what it is they're spending money on? It's probably not gonna happen, right? So let me ask you this. I was going through your website, and one of the things it says there is that financial success is 80% psychological and 20% math. So I get the math part of it. What are we talking about in terms of the psychology behind it? Is that 80%? Is it mindset? Is it discipline? What are you referring to?
I'd say overall, definitely mindset could wrap it up. And I'm
Okay.
really glad you brought that up because a lot of coaches will address that. It's 80% mindset, 20% concept. And then a lot of times,
Mm,
the bulk of the conversation is on that 20%. So the bulk of my book is written about that 80%. So it not only applies to finances, but they can apply it directly to recovery.
okay.
Uh, yeah. So basically, when I was in that point of I have the IRS, hospital bills and collections,
Hmm.
loans, yada, 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 um, I was not going to get out of that situation with a math equation. If I had looked at it like that, I wouldn't be here
Yeah.
because I was making $500 a month, or I'm sorry, $500 a week. And, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. I'm telling you, I just could not see it. And it took something deeper than numbers to get there. And that's what I wanted to really get home with this book and really drive into the reader that they can do it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, man, and that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, if you're just looking at the numbers, and again, like you were saying, you're spending like you're making 3 or 4 grand a month, or you have 3 or 4 grand a month in expenses, but you're only making a few $100 a week or whatever it is. I mean, if you're just looking at that, it's not going to happen. But if we shift that mindset to more of like a solution oriented mindset instead of, just like in recovery, instead of focusing on the problem, what can I do to start changing this here? And most importantly, probably get into action behind it. That's where things start to change. So let's talk about the book. Okay. So personal finance and addiction recovery. Man, I really love that you did this. I think this is, it's something that I don't think is talked about enough. In terms of, I'll tell you this. Like, what really struck me is, is that I would go to like some men's 12-step meetings, for instance. I was blown away by how often I heard that these guys had issues with the IRS. It was
Yes.
like there were a couple meetings where it went around the room and like every single guy was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I had my run-in with the IRS." So why did you write this book and what is it all about?
First off, I felt like, because it's such a taboo topic, I mean, not just in recovery, but in life in general, it's
Sure.
really hard to sit down with someone, like you right now and talk about money. It's very difficult. So, can you imagine if we were all getting sober on our own?
Mm,
Like how well would that work? And it's the same way with financial recovery. At least that's how I view it. Is if people aren't openly talking about it and sharing their experiences and how they got out of certain situations and what they were able to build in themselves out of that experience, we're limited to learning just from our own experience. And that's the hard way of really getting anywhere. So I'm trying to make it okay for people to open up about their own positions by sharing my experience, which was very severe. And
okay.
if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's funny. I'm actually thinking there was a few weeks back, there's an AA meeting that I lead every week. And so I brought up one of the topic that I brought up was about money. It was out of one of like the daily meditation books. And I was
Mhm.
like, all right, so who's gonna share first? Man, it was one of those meetings where it's like, all right, well, I guess it's just gonna be a meditation meeting because no one's saying no
Yeah,
one is saying anything. So I think that's a really good point you're making. Again, it's recovery works in such a large part because I come in and I have hope because I see other people are getting out from under all these financial problems that many of us, I would say most of us, I think I can confidently say that most of us, experience. Man, I see some people that held things together and they didn't have any. That was not me. I think that's more few and far between, and I definitely had to start over myself. I had a ton of debt, like you were saying, hospital bills, credit cards. It was just issues with the law, like with my driver's license and other things like that that I mentioned. So let's just assume that there are some people that are, like I said, starting over. Maybe they're at these different points. They're either new to recovery and they're starting over completely, or maybe they've been in recovery for a while. And that area of their life, because I see this a lot too, that area of their life is really just causing some serious stress in their life. They can't figure out how to get the ball rolling there. So let's talk about some of those things. Where should they start? Like what should they do to actually get started?
Sure. I've got a 12-step program that I'm actually laying out. It's generally laid out, but I'd really love to hone it in with some people over time.
Okay.
The first one that I have on there is to work a recovery program. I mean, first and foremost, whether that's I know 3 principles is taken off over here, or if it's 12-step, or just something that's the foundation.
Okay.
And then two is to have steady income. So first and foremost, those sound very obvious, but you can't do much without those. It's almost like the remaining 11 steps, kind of stacked on that first one.
Yeah.
Those two are the foundation for the 12, and then after that, the third one is to establish a savings habit. And there's a reason for that. But after that, it would definitely be to take care of anything legally related, because having another jail sentence hanging over your head, or what if I get caught, it cleared up my conscience like you just wouldn't believe. And from
Mhm.
that, I was able to stack some small wins and keep this momentum going, which ultimately just sailed my self-confidence and self-esteem in the process.
Okay.
So I would start there. Yeah, have a recovery program, have a job, and then establish a savings habit and take care of those legal issues.
Okay. So, and let me ask you this, and that makes perfect sense to me. I think that again, one of the main things that I saw is that if I didn't have my recovery, I mean, it didn't matter how much money I was making. And I think, that one thing we definitely have to keep in mind when comes to just money and, financial success, if you will, in general, um, is that, whether someone is in recovery or not, if they don't change that mindset overall, then, it's kind of like you see people that win the lottery, right? And if they still have that same mindset to where it's like they just have, they don't have any control over their finances, those are the people that you see go broke within, like, it doesn't matter how much money they got. They're still spending the same way. They still have the same mindset. They're not saving any of it. They're not thinking long term. They're not budgeting. They're not doing any of those things. So, for me, I see what you're saying. It's change the thinking, make sure you have the recovery in place. What are some of the biggest mistakes, kind of looking at this from a different point of view here? What are some of the biggest mistakes that you think people in recovery make? I know you mentioned just, like we were talking about, kind of sweeping things under the rug. What are some other mistakes, maybe with clients that you've worked with, that you see people making?
Sure. I would say, starting with myself as an example, is I was just shot out of a cannon every day. I converted my addictive habits to workaholism.
Hmm.
That had a direct impact on the quality of my recovery. And instead of just working out straight all the time, and some of the most popular financial coaches out there are encouraging this: get motivated, go, 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 work, 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 work. And my question is, what direction do you want to go in? What are your goals? Get clear on the direction before you just run full sprint, because I was working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and I see other men doing this too, and other women. Um, and all of a sudden I can't get to as many meetings. I'm not hanging around with as many friends, and I'm just sort of back to that isolated state. And I'm convincing myself that I'm doing this for a good purpose, and that's kind of where that first step of recovery comes in.
Sure.
Maintain that recovery program, whatever it is that's working for you. So I would encourage people to get clear on what they want and then get educated on how to get there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I guess it's kind of that, if we were going to use an analogy here, it's like, how do you hit a target that you can't see? Or
Yes.
how do you get to, a destination if you don't know where it is you're going, or like you said, how to get there? Okay, so it's what you're saying is figure out where you want to go, get some clarity on that, exactly what it is you want, figure out a game plan to get there. Whether and so let's touch on that real quick. How do you suggest getting there? I mean, so you're a financial coach, so I mean that's one thing you can do. What are some other ways that people can, let's say I figured out where it is I want to go. I figured out that, I've got some debt I need to pay off. Maybe I want to have a certain amount in savings over the next few years. Maybe I'd like to get another stream of income coming in or something like that. So I have an idea of what I want to do. Where do you suggest I start in terms of working towards some of these things? And how do I lay out a plan?
That's a great question. And I'm not crazy about Dave Ramsey. I do like some of his stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
His four walls are a great place to start.
Okay.
And those are, so you have an idea of all the debts you want to pay off, you know where you want to be by a certain time. Make sure that you have your recovery program for one, and then food, shelter, utilities, and transportation. A lot of things none of us had when we were active.
Yeah.
Rather get high than pay the light bill, or didn't have a vehicle, or because we crashed it in a drunken escapade, or
Yes.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
What that does is it keeps you out of that survival mode that we're in, that fight or flight sort of state,
Hmm.
because all your basic needs are met. And from there, you can break down the rest of your budget and find out how much you can contribute to your remaining debts going forward. And a lot of people, they're going to be in what's called like a negative cash flow position. There's going to be more creditors calling than they have money to offer. In which, at that case, I would recommend just making a list of all of them and just call them. Tell them what you're doing, and help them understand that I can't pay everybody right now, and this bill is the least detrimental to my position right now. So I promise, later on I'll get around to it. Here's what I have to take care of right now. I just want to let you know that I'm thinking about you, and I'm going to make it up to you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and that's, going back to, if we're looking at the 12 steps, I mean, that's kind of like it is a financial amends, right? I mean, that's just something that we should make right, because it's just the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if it's a hospital, if it's a credit card, that's something I owe. I should make it right. I need to ask again, because I know that there are going to be some people listening and they're thinking, okay, like that's not going to work. I'm going to call these people. They're not going to care. So when you advise, and I think you and I already said we both had the same experience, but when you advise someone, look, hey, we've got your list now of all your debts. I want you to go ahead and call these people. What actually happens most of the time when they make this phone call?
Most of the time, they're just happy to hear from you.
Hmm.
I mean, in most cases, I'm not saying that's going to be every single time. It really depends. Usually, the ones that hold the biggest grudges are personal. Like I borrowed money from someone and didn't pay it back. But if it's a company and they're required to keep some level of professionality, it's usually not the end of the world. And if it's sitting in collections, they're planning on not getting paid.
Hmm.
So they're going to be happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
Men, most.
That makes sense. So let me ask you this, to dive a little deeper into that there. How would you prioritize what you pay back first? Obviously, if the IRS is saying I'm going to come take your car, like that's going to be number one. But beyond something like that, how would I actually go about saying, okay, I've got my debts laid out. I can see clearly what the problem is, what's going on. how do I figure out which one to tackle first? Is it just the biggest one? Is it the one that do I just pick one and start moving? Like what do I how would you suggest I go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say just get them all down on paper first.
Okay.
Just like that fourth step, how we just get everything out, how it just feels good to not have it camping around upstairs.
Mm,
That's the best thing I think to do. And then from there, after you take care of the four walls and your survival needs are met, I would probably tackle the ones with the biggest payments and the biggest interest rates. Um, if and that have low balances. So like if you have a $2,000 balance, but it's a super high interest rate, and it's only 2,000, it's a big payment. That's going to free up a lot of cash flow. So you can eliminate a high interest rate, low balance, high payment, and all of a sudden you're going to have an extra couple $100 a month. But it's really case by case. And if you really want a foolproof way, Ramsey's debt snowball is really good
okay.
to start with.
Okay. So that makes sense. So you're saying because if something has a high interest rate, although I'm just seeing, everything as a whole, and I think that's again why it's so important just to get it down and really look at it. And we're coming back to what I would agree is probably one of the hardest parts of all this, that I know was so difficult for me. I didn't want to look at it.
Mhm.
It's been this huge problem that has snowballed over time, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. But I think that's a good point. It's even though we just see this as a number, what maybe we're not thinking about sometimes is something that has a 25-30% interest rate. I mean, man, that's costing you more and more money when you're not taking care of that. So that makes sense. And I see what you're saying though. Everyone's going to have a little different situation, but look at those debts that have those high interest rates first. Now, let me ask you this. How much do you think that just, taking care of things financially, getting rid of these debts and look, like, let's be clear, no one ever told us that we were gonna get rich when we got sober, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't think and success means different things to different people, but, in my mind, if I'm struggling to because I have seen, I don't wanna say seen people relapse over this, but it doesn't help, my situation, right? If I can't pay my bills and those basics that you're talking about, food, shelter, those basic things. If I can't take care of those things, it definitely makes sobriety a lot more difficult. So, how much do you think that figuring all this financial stuff out has to do with staying sober in your mind?
For me, I just felt an incredible amount of relief, mainly from facing the law and the hospital bills and a lot of that stuff that was killing my credit.
Hmm.
And money touches every single area of our lives. So you can really enhance on personal development following your money. But I think overall, what I got out of it was a great sense of accomplishment and also self-confidence. Like I felt like an adult where it was like, I know where my money's going. I know how much I'm making. I have a goal. I'm working towards that goal. I'm seeing progress. I remember, when we bought a house for the first time, my wife and I, and we had one child. That's a milestone in everybody's life.
Yeah.
And I think it's because when you're active and you're an addict, nobody trusts you. Nobody trusts you. And then that credit report, the higher your credit goes, is all these lenders are saying, we trust you. You pay your bills, like we trust you. And it made me feel complete, I guess. Working a recovery program, having a higher power, having new friends, getting my financial life together, adding value in the workplace and getting paid more for that added value. It was incredible, an incredible feeling.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I really love that. So I do want to make sure here just that you're plugging this book as best as possible. So are there any other tips out of the book that you'd like to share that you think are maybe important, just so you give the listeners a little taste of what's to offer there?
Okay, this is the bulk of it, and you touched on it earlier.
Okay.
I'm gonna sum it up in one sentence.
Sure.
Where your focus goes, energy flows.
Hmm. I love
That's
that.
it. You're gonna get more of what your attention is on.
Wow. I love that, man, and I think that's so true, and that there's a lot of different things to think about there, right? I mean, it's really, am I focusing on the solution? Am I focusing on the problem? And so again, you're going back to that mindset. So I think that is so important what you're talking about. It's that, and this is just, if you look at anyone out there, business coaches or just, like gurus, so to speak, that are giving advice on, financial success or success in business or success in anything really. Um, they're really just, I guess they're saying that the mindset is the most important part.
Yes.
The way that we're thinking and approaching all of this is the most important part. It doesn't matter if you want to get in shape, you want to lose weight, it's the mindset. You want to get out of debt and put some money in your bank account. It's got to start with the mindset. So I think that's awesome, man. And I can't wait to check the book out myself. Now, I really appreciate you coming on here. Before we wrap up, and you've shared a lot of good tips here, a lot of good stuff. What is one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the Sober Nation?
That's a great question. I would say just get clear on what you want out of life. It'll help you stay sober. It'll help you win with money. It'll help you with anything. Just knowing what you want, and it's okay to want things as an addict and an alcoholic, and it's okay when you get them, as
Wow.
long as in a position of integrity.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, that's such good advice, because I know that if anything, for me, I didn't I thought maybe it was an ego thing if I wanted good things in my life. I didn't think there was a lot of limiting belief going on. I didn't think I deserved good things in my life, and I think it's the exact opposite, man. When we're really doing this recovery deal, we're doing the next right thing. We have good motives. Man, I deserve to have a good life. And I think what a lot of people don't think about is guess what? When I have a good life and just financially speaking, I'm not in debt and I can take care of my family, I can also make a bigger impact on the world. I can help more people. And that's really what this is all about at the end of the day, right?
Very well said. Yes.
Awesome, man. Brandon, I thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for being here with me, man. I really appreciate all the tips. I'm glad that you shared your book with us, and I just thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's mutual.
Absolutely. So you can learn all about Brandon and his financial coaching at moneymatterspersonalfinance.com. You can find Brandon's book, Personal Finance and Addiction Recovery, on Amazon. I'll link to both of those in the show notes. Nation, thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you soon. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.